John, again, thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to kick it off a little bit. To the folks in the audience, thank you for joining us. Today, we are going to be discussing the state of early adopters and how they're leveraging generative AI in the Microsoft Cloud. I'm Jeff Craddy, the Senior Director of Advanced Technologies for Blue Mantis, and I'm joined today by John Treadway, CEO and founder of AI Technology Partners. John, you mind saying a moment about you and your firm?
Yeah, sure. AITP is a generative AI solutions company. We deliver custom and packaged solutions for our clients. We are very much focused on the Microsoft stack, and I've been doing this for a while, and AI and cloud and a whole bunch of other things. But it's good to be here, Jeff.
Yes. Thank you, John, for coming. All right, so let's get into it here. John, you and I have been talking to a lot of customers, trying to make sense of the whole generative AI, whether, planning for future activities, reacting to current conditions. Just from your perspective, how should our audience today really be thinking about the state of the market as it stands today?
This is very much like any other early stage market, which we are still a very early stage. It's hard to kind of think about the fact that it was a little less than 2 years ago that ChatGPT launched. So I think there's this expectation based on all the hype that everybody is, kind of running down the runway and everybody's got generative AI embedded all throughout their organizations. It's simply not the case. But people are moving in that direction. So, we like to use analogies, right? So whatever your sport is, just think about the fact that whether you're warming up for a football or soccer match, or you're playing baseball, for the most part, most of the market is not yet taken the field. Most of the market, from a client perspective, is still very early stage, still evaluating, still adopting, still doing POCs, still thinking about kind of what the value propositions are. In a lot of cases, haven't even budgeted for it, certainly in 2024. And we're hoping that people are looking to put more muscle into it in 2025. So we're having those budgetary conversations today, which are looking to be quite promising. So people are starting to kind of lean in at this point. 2024 was very much about education and understanding and trying to figure out what the guardrails are.
Yep. Yeah, similar experience. A lot of the customers that we talked to, several months ago, mostly concerned about, risk oriented to the business, right? I mean, we do spend a lot of time with folks in the technology function, CIOs, VPs, directors within IT, and for their mandate, they're mostly, risk-oriented positions for a firm. But how is this different? Like, why is this spilling out into some of the functions? And, how are people explaining some of the productivity enhancements, if that's what they are, to those other non-technical folks? Like how is that happening in the marketplace now?
Yeah, I think this is not too dissimilar from the early days of end user SaaS applications, right? Where I'll use Salesforce as the example that most people know. Salesforce didn't come in through IT, it came in through the business, through the sales teams. And they had a really great adoption strategy kind of going forward. And the IT organizations were still focused on traditional application deployments. And it took a little while before IT, I'll say, caught up. I don't think that in a negative way, but really kind of got with the program and actually started leading the charge, and then things started to move really quickly. I think this is really similar as well. The biggest value, let me put this in contrast, right? So we've all been through the cloud days, right? And particularly those of us and those on the call that are IT leaders. Cloud is an IT-centric activity, right? Cloud is about my infrastructure and my platforms and how I deliver IT services. And it's a different IT operating model, but at the end of the day, it's all about IT. The end user doesn't really care where their application is. What they care about is what it does. So from an application perspective, they care about what's the user interface and the experience. Well, generative AI is a user interface and experience kind of thing, right? So ChatGPT is an end user tool the way that clients or the way that end users are experiencing generative AI is through all these applications, whether it's ChatGPT or Copilot or any one of a number of thousands of other applications that have been deployed. And if you think about it from a functional perspective, right? I'm a marketing leader, a sales leader, an operations leader, an HR leader, a finance leader. There are use cases in my function that generative AI can give me some value towards. And so one of the challenges, of course, is that IT, as you said, like IT leaders, IT executives are focused on managing risk. There's budgetary and cost pressure. And there's a lot of deliverables, a lot of backlog, if you will, of things that need to get done. And now all this, it's all thrown up in the air because the users are going, give me generative AI. I want generative AI. And sometimes they don't even know what that means. They don't know what it means for them. So I think it's a challenge for IT leaders today to try to figure out how to respond to that. But I think it's really critical that they respond, and I'll say leaning in, right? Leaning in. You have an opportunity to lead here, like with any wave. The IT organization has an opportunity to lead, to provide capability and service to the end users that in a lot of cases, they can't even envision what the use cases might be, but IT can help them find that either through internal engagement or bringing in partners like Blue Mantis and AITP. So pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So the end user market at the end of the day, this is where the value is. It's where I'm going to get the ROI is the end user business case. I'm not going to get an ROI on, converting something to AI because that something doesn't exist today, right? The AI is creating new capability, new functionality.
Yeah, well said. The thing that kind of comes to mind, right? I mean, everybody on the call, everybody in the world at large, they have a choice to make. They could do something now, they could do something later, they might never do anything. I mean, from my seat, my position, I am a technologist as well, and I see the utility and the value prop of leveraging tech in my pursuit of business goals. But like, how do you think about like, should I do it? Should I not do it? When's the time right? Like, how would you advise people on that front?
So I think this is the fundamental challenge that a lot of organizations are facing right now. There are some organizations out there that are really moving ahead. They're investing, they're doubling down. I mean, they're spending in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars, if not more, in building out AI and generative AI capability in their organization. So the very largest of companies, the largest banks, and so on. But I think we got to put it in context, right? If you go back to kind of an IT risk and governance kind of framework, there's the risk of doing something wrong, right? Having my brand value, having data leakage, having all those things. Those are all very manageable risks. Those are actually things that we can control for very, very easily. We just need to show you how that's done. That's not hard. There's a bigger risk, which is not traditionally seen as an IT risk, which is the risk of inaction, the risk of what happens to my business if I don't move them forward with generative AI when the market is moving forward. Now, I did say that it's early days, right? A lot of people haven't taken the field yet. They're just kind of still warming up. But there are people moving, and some people are moving faster than others. And I suspect that if you looked around in your organizations, talking to the audience here, you might find that there are a lot of pockets within your organization where people are actually using generative AI and maybe in contravention of a policy or guidelines that you may have released. They're doing it because the value is so strong. And I use it all day, every day. Imagine that. I'm an AI guy. So of course I'm using it all the time. But I'm doing weeks worth of work in an afternoon using this technology and moving my business forward. And that is so empowering for me. It's empowering for your users. So I do think the one way to think about this is what's the risk of not doing it, right? The risk of business relevance, the risk of competitive disadvantage, and so on. Now, let me turn it the other way, is that it is always important, right, for any investment that you're going to make, that you have a really clear understanding of what the value is that you're going to derive from that investment. So there's the risk of not doing anything, and those are kind of, I'll say, existential risks. But there's the risk of spending a lot of money and not getting any results, right? So there's a process that you can go through, which we often go through with these new technologies, where we learn, we experiment, we learn some more, we experiment, we learn some more, but we need to start doing that today and move things forward. The biggest ROI that we see isn't in, generally enabling everybody to use enterprise level generative AI. It's incredibly valuable, right? That's incredibly valuable. But it's harder to put the measurements on that until you get to a specific business process. Like, I'm dealing with how do I make my client experience better? How do I improve the amount of the quantity and the quality of SEO material that the marketing department is creating? How do I have better outcomes for my sales teams, right? Those things I can measure a lot more closely because they're aligned to a specific function and a specific team. I can actually see the results of that. And then I can turn that into hard dollar ROI value propositions. Like, I'm going to save this amount of money because I'm not going to need to hire people, or I might actually reduce my staffing in this function and maybe shift them to a different function, and so on. So the really the key lesson here, or the key thing that we're seeing with our clients, and we're seeing in the market, even with people that we're not working with, is that moving forward gives you clarity, right? Not doing anything keeps you in the dark. And clarity is really, really called for at this point. So we're obviously biased. We heavily recommend that people get moving forward and sooner than later. But we're not alone. And this is, McKinsey's saying this. All the analyst firms are saying this, and business reporters are saying this. And in fact, it's a national dialogue right now. If you're not moving forward, in a very real sense, it's kind of like you're moving backwards, because the market is moving forward.
Yeah, well said. I want to tackle something or go right at something you said, which again is near and dear to my heart. Let's call it innovation or experiment or risk taking, even, right? Who's doing that today? Like what have you seen? Who's actually put money down to engage in these type of experiments?
This is one of the fun things. It's not one place, right? I can't go and say, oh, look at here, over in pharmaceuticals, everybody's doing it, right? And in fact, that's not the case. Some are moving forward. There are companies that we know of that are making really, really very, a lot of progress and doing very interesting things across a lot of different functions, like trial data management and provider portal access and so on and so on, right? There's lots and lots research libraries and that you can create knowledge bases that you can talk to using high level language models and so on. Same thing is true in financial services, but the interesting thing that we're also seeing is that there are very, very young companies, right? Early stage companies. We're working with one company that they're fairly small, very interesting. And without giving the domain away, we're using generative AI to basically categorize the long form answers of, hundreds or thousands of surveys in a matter of seconds, right? Whereas it used to take somebody who really understood what the client was talking about, right? What the respondents were talking about. It used to take a week to 2 weeks to categorize 1,500 responses and put them in the bucket so that then they could create reports for them. It happens in 5 minutes now, right? And so it's small companies and large companies, different stages, different things, different functions. But I'll tell you one thing is that oftentimes, if you really want to see where the market is, it's in the marketing department, right? Marketing leaders, sales leaders. So the kind of the front end of the house is going there very fast. So it's less the industry, but it's more the functions that are moving forward. But heck, we're seeing operations teams, right, with big organizations with big teams in India building really fascinating capabilities using generative AI. So there's an old saying, right? The future's here, but it's not evenly distributed. I think we have that, right? We have kind of dots on the map. We don't have it hasn't all filled in yet. And it's, we're getting there.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree. There have been some Blue Mantis customers that have taken, a leap into at least experimentation, in some case, massive scale deployment with Copilot. Um, in terms of like the type of folks you're having conversations with, I know you picked on a particular verticals. Is there anybody who's at this point, ready to say, hey, no, I'm making a big hedge, or do you expect that to happen over the next 3, 4 months?
Well, I mean, we're seeing it in places, right? So I'm happy to be at a client right now. They're all in on this. We're deploying an enterprise, what we call our enterprise GPT, but it's an enterprise Copilot like capability that's custom, that knows about their business, and we're deploying it to over 3,000 employees. We're kind of late in the process of deploying it to them, and we're getting enormous usage, feedback. People are leaning in, and they're using it in. And that's for all of their department, but all of their company. But we had already previously deployed a couple to their marketing department to help them with content and also competitive intelligence. We're also working with their operations team on solutions that help them accelerate the resolution of incidents and help them document them better, right? So it's across the board, and they've got, I don't know, 30 or 40 different possible prototypes and pilots that they're looking at right now that could be very interesting. So you think about it as like putting a blanket, right? General generative AI capability in the hands of everybody. That's really critical because they're not going to know, if they're not using it today, they're not going to know what they can do with it until they have it, right? Until they're told it's okay to use it in their work, meaning it's secure, there's no risk of loss, it's locked down, and so on. When they have it, what we find is that as we're working with them, they're saying, well, how do I do this or how do I do that? And sometimes what we'll uncover is you're not going to do it with a general purpose tool, right? This is great, but it's like a multi-tool. It does a lot of things really, really fantastically. But at one level, what you really need is something really targeted at, I really need a bandsaw, or I really need a power drill, or I need a ditch digging tool or something, whatever that is. So what I'll need is a custom solution that's focused on a specific business process, because the data is different, the settings different, the prompts are different, the whole flow. There may not be a chat window at all. It might just happen as a series of API calls in the background that are generating, really, really amazing value propositions on the outside. So I think, Jeff, I think one of the things that we're just seeing is that you don't know what you can do with it until you start playing with it. And even then, everybody knows, oh, I can create a blog post, or I can create this, or I can create that. When you start to think about, like, how do I integrate with these systems, pull in data from these systems, and generate really sophisticated outcomes from this? And you're doing systems integration, you're building custom solutions. I'm doing things that are really sophisticated with lots of data, lots of processing. I have checks and balances to make sure that the outputs are accurate, but I still rely on the human in the loop to make sure that it's clean, right? So that it's doing the right job, right? So I don't know. This client's in the tech industry, tech services industry, but we're seeing this across the board in other clients as well. And there's some clients that we've talked to that literally are not there yet. They haven't started anything, and they've blocked access to all these tools. And, I get it. I understand that. But I think that there's a big risk there. One huge risk, right? Which we talked about, a lot of risks of, like, the lack of, the cost of inaction and so on, and becoming irrelevant. But the other one is a lot of people want to work where the cool tools are, right? I want to work at a company that's going to empower me to use these things. Do I want to work at a company that makes me do things the old way? Maybe I want to work at a company that makes me do the things the new way. And we saw this with cloud as well. Capital One, Verizon, some other people that were really big leaders in adopting AWS and other clouds found that the fact that they were adopting this became a magnet for recruiting for their technical and IT organizations.
Right.
Anyway, it's a long answer because there's not a simple, quick answer to that one, Jeff, but it's kind of all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember the cloud thing as well. And folks that were out interviewing and stuff, and they said, hey, no, it's not cloud, and they kind of, poo-pooed the experience. So
Yeah,
uh
there's a
that
couple of questions in the Q&A at some point when you want to get to them, but
okay. Um let's we'll come back to those in a second.
yeah, sure. And by the way, if you're out there, if you have questions, just put them in the Q&A, and we will wrap up this session, definitely answering as many of them as we can.
Yep. No, thanks. So one other thing, I saw an infographic probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was one of those silly things on the internet, but it just had this prolific sprawl of all of the generative AI products, companies, offerings. I mean, not for nothing, but again, the super majority of us are still year one, year two of what's going on here. I mean, how big do you think this thing's going to get? Because you can go out to the internet and find that infographic I'm talking about. It's probably got 5 to 10,000 different type of offerings out there. So what's your take on that?
So it's really interesting because I think there's a dynamic here, and I'm going to answer your question, but it's going to be a little bit of a roundabout way here. Not like that's any different from earlier, but I think we'll get to it. But first off, the cost of building software is approaching zero, right? So Andre Karpathy, who was at OpenAI, he was an AI researcher at Tesla. I think he might have been at Google as well. He quoted recently today that he doesn't actually write code anymore. He just writes English into a coding tool like Cursor, and there's others. And what that means is the cost of delivering software is going way down, right? For any application that people might want to have, which makes it a lot easier. And there's just going to be tons more applications. There's a little bit of a risk here, right? Which is that who wrote these applications? Are they any good? Are they going to stick around? Are you going to adopt an application that then in 6 months or a year is going to get acquired and then deprecated by somebody else, right? So all of the traditional risks of kind of this Cambrian explosion. But yes, tens of thousands of applications are being built, and new ones. I would venture to guess that 1,000 new generative AI applications are launching every week, if not every day. Right?
Wow.
Just it's amazing. Now, there's another part of this dynamic, which is one, there's all these tools that people are publishing as, hey, come buy my tool or use my tool, right? It's an AI writer, or it's an AI legal assistant or something like that. Some of these things are really sophisticated and they're really good. There's a new thing that I think is appearing today, which is building software to solve a specific problem one time, right? So in the past, if I was building internal software, I'd build something that is going to have long life. It's going to have a lot of utility. I'm going to have lots of uses of it. And because if I'm going to invest in building it, because it's expensive, I want it to be used, I'm not going to build it for one user for one use case, right? Now, with generative AI, I can go to Vercel and the V0 or to Cursor or one of these other tools. There's a lot of them as well. And I can talk at it for a little while, and then it can generate an application that can solve a problem today that I have only one of, right? It'll solve that problem. And you even go to Claude and go to their artifacts thing and say, design me a user interface and write me an application that does X, Y, and Z. Every day I'm seeing people basically going through and creating a mobile app in an afternoon that they can deploy on the App Store, right? But they don't need to. They're just going to deploy it to their own phone, and they're going to solve this one problem. Like I want my own stock lookup application. I don't want to use the ones that are on the store. So for the first time ever, writing software is now something that I can do for one-time use, and it's cost effective. And I build an application to analyze a bunch of data and give me a visualization. And I only care about that once, because then I'm never going to do it again. Or I can write an application that I deploy to the market and I want people to use it, but there's tens of thousands of them being deployed. How do you survive in that noise? So I think as IT leaders thinking about it from a procurement and asset management perspective, the key is to kind of be really, really careful about who you're buying from, right? There's a lot of tools out there. If you're buying and we don't sell packaged software, we sell custom solutions here, right? That we deliver. We have repeatable custom solutions. But are these companies going to be around? What are they doing with your data? Are they secure? Do you know who they are? Where was it developed? Where's the data going? Where is it residing? And all of that kind of traditional questions that you have. And I think a lot of those tools are going after what I'll call the consumer and prosumer segment, where people are using it for themselves. And oftentimes they're using it at work and using it with your data. So this is kind of where you have to set the right policies and processes down. Anyway, I told you it'd be a long answer. I was right.
No, yeah, very good. It's crazy. I see the expansiveness, same as you. I haven't personally seen any of this yet, but you're out in the field all the time, all day, every day. So any consolidation, like is anything starting to squeeze, get kind of taken off the table, or are we still in the open up the funnel phase here?
We're way early in the open up the funnel phase. So, I saw this coming. This play was going to happen in the cloud space. So in 2009, I was writing about the fact that there had been a massive explosion of everybody had a cloud, right? HPE, Verizon, everybody's building AT&T cloud, right? Everybody wanted to be in the cloud business. And I knew that that was an unsustainable situation because there was huge economies of scale. So it was going to consolidate anyway. And B, there just wasn't going to be enough market demand to support, 30, 50, 100 different cloud providers, growing quickly. So the big four cloud providers of, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, now Oracle, I guess, and then in China, there's a few, Alibaba and so on. Those are going to be the dominant providers. I don't think we're anywhere near that here. I think what we're seeing is all of the traditional kind of incumbent vendors are adding generative AI to their tools. ServiceNow, Salesforce, Workday, Kronos, right? UKG, whatever. They're all adding generative AI into their solutions in order to stay, that they're going to continue to stay kind of relevant and be important. So these enterprise apps, right? That's happening. All of the smaller kind of bespoke apps, nobody thinks that those are going to be around for very long anyway, the smaller consumer prosumer apps, because the models are moving so fast that whatever I deliver today, like, oh my God, I've got this great thing it can do writing. And now we have OpenAI's O1 model that just came out that literally blows GPT-4o out of the water on specific tasks, right? Specific reasoning tasks and, kind of really thought-provoking stuff like doing product management now just got way easier. I wrote a 12-page spec for a solution this morning with 5 prompts. Right. A detailed spec with use cases, with exceptions and with all of and then I had it write, and it required an API. I had it write the API and document the API for me.
Wow.
And that was I think in an hour I was done. And it's massive, right? So that didn't exist. That couldn't be done as easily 2 weeks ago, let alone 2 months ago or 2 years ago. So it's moving so fast. I think a lot of these consumer prosumer tools are going to be kind of blown out of the water. So stick with the big vendors that they're going to be around, right? Microsoft, Salesforce, Amazon, Claude is a pretty big vendor at this point. They've got a lot of backing and so on. All these little tools that are out on there's a site called thereisanaIforthat.com. ThereisanaIforthat.com has, I don't know, tens of thousands of them. It's ridiculous.
Wild. Wow. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So let's change it up a little bit. Hopefully folks got a good understanding and we're able to kind of calibrate where they are relative to what you're seeing out there and what I'm seeing out there. Let's talk about some of the blockers, like, typical change, there's some fear, uncertainty, doubt, maybe slight resistance. All of a sudden, there's, a revelation that, hey, there's some, actual value in that thing. Like, frame it up for me. How can folks think about the blockers so that as they encounter them in their own organization, they're prepared for them, and can pivot and influence as they need? Like, how should we think about that?
Yeah, so yeah, I think IT kind of thought process will be thinking about the security and risk aspect of it, right? And I think those are blockers, not because you can't get around them. It's just that they don't know yet how to get around them because they haven't done it yet. So the first time you do something, it kind of feels a little risky. We can walk you through that. It's not that complicated. It's not as scary as it kind of looks. That's fairly easy. The hard one is the people, right? It's getting your team to know how to leverage generative AI to be able to move their function forward as best as possible. So let me give you an example. Microsoft did a study of Copilot for Microsoft 365 users. They published it. We'll put a link in the notes for this at some point. I'll send that along. And the statistics that they cited were really kind of weak, right? And not because they couldn't have been better, but I think what happened. So for example, people spent, I don't know, 12% less time doing emails. 12% less time doing emails is not moving the needle, right? We're talking about how do you get 5x or 10x productivity improvement? How do you do what I did this morning, right? Writing a product spec in, a solution spec that is, massive and huge and hugely valuable in a matter of an hour instead of weeks that it would normally have taken me to write that. So, the ROI or the value props that they were generating there was really low. And this goes back to the barrier. The suspicion, and this is something that's shared by a lot of other people. There's a guy named Paul Rutzler who runs the Marketing AI Institute. He's got a podcast called the Artificial Intelligence Show. I highly recommend it. And he was kind of really beating up on them pretty hard about this. It's because a lot of people have deployed Copilot or other similar tools into their organization with zero training or very little bit about training. And here's how to do prompt engineering. Like, here's a cheat sheet on doing prompt engineering. You have to enable people in their function. You don't enable them to just, how do I use a spreadsheet? You have to learn, how do I do spreadsheet for scenario analysis for my financial planning and an analysis function, right? So in AI, I need to take it down to the level of their function. How do I train sales reps how to be more effective sellers with generative AI, count planning, meeting prep, meeting summarization, follow-ups, and so on? There's all those use cases. How do I train people in the legal or HR professions what to use these tools for and how to get the value out of them? So what we do is when we're deploying solutions, and we think this is kind of the most value that we actually create here at AITP. The biggest value that we create is we don't deploy things without enablement. And we really focus on that. So if you take our solution to deploy like we're doing with this client that I'm at today, if we deploy that with no training and no enablement, it's going to get kind of some usage, but it's not going to be that valuable. We're doing regular training sessions. We have office hours. We're doing Ask Me Anythings. We're putting out documentation. We're putting out new features. We're putting out new, right? And it's a constant cadence of communication about this. We're working with the corporate communications team to put company-wide emails out from the CEO about what you should do and how to use this stuff. So it is a change management process. And the Marketing AI Institute did a state of AI and marketing report, something like that, published a couple months ago, and they produced it. The number one barrier to generative AI adoption is training and enablement. It's the last thing that people are thinking about right now because it's like, oh, I know how to use generative AI, so it's not that hard. Well, Bob, the HR manager or HR rep, doesn't have those tools, doesn't know how to do it. So, the next generation of workforce are kids, the kids that are in school right now. They're learning how to use these tools, and they'll be fine in the workforce. But most of most of corporate America isn't using these tools and they don't know how. They're afraid in some cases.
Yeah, I recall, a year ago, let's say, generative AI was going to take all over the world, and we were all out of a job. Hasn't happened yet. Not sure whether it's not going to happen, but doubt it. Um, that barrier, it reminds me of like early day, phones when the iPhone came out, and there was just this overwhelming rush to go, get one of these things. And then the immediate fast follow was, now what do I do with it?
Now, what do I do with it? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Uh, you mentioned jobs, right? And so I'm going to give everybody another hint. We'll put a link to this as well. But again, I'm kind of a fan of this guy, Paul Retzler. SmarterX.com, I think it's, or SmarterX.ai is his kind of consulting institute, if you will, for this stuff. He's been doing some pretty good, interesting stuff. If you go to SmarterX.ai or .com/tools, there's something that they put there called Jobs GPT. And Jobs GPT is you can put any job or any role into it, and it'll tell you based on the level of how AI is progressing from a maturity perspective, using kind of a common framework for AI maturity, like all the way up to fully agentic systems that can do all sorts of stuff, what the risk is to your function in terms of what percentage of your job is going to be done by AI. And it's fascinating, depending, obviously if you lay bricks for a living, very little of that, although maybe robots at some point. But so it's that's level 10. If you are a marketing writer, it may hit you sooner than later, right? So it depends on the role, but Jobs GPT is pretty interesting. And I tried it on a bunch of different roles, and I thought that it was, it wasn't exactly where I thought it would be, but it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to kind of iterate over this last point for me and the audience, in terms of those like type of enablement engagements, day one, fear, uncertainty, and doubt resistance. What's a timeline look like for a company, and anything you can advise on, like, just kind of the framework for how it gets rolled out?
Yeah, I think like a lot of other things, there's a lot of people that there are people in every organization that will not adhere to the rules and they jump ahead, right? There are other people that will, and you could try to catch them, but it's kind of a fool's errand. There's a lot of people that once you give them permission, right, then they start to kind of experiment and they start to play with this, and they're not exactly sure, what do I do with it today? And they use it and then they forget to use it the next time. And the hardest thing to get people to do is, I'm starting a task. I've even caught myself, like I've spent 15 minutes on something. I'm like, wait a minute, why am I not using the AI to do that, right? Yep. I mean, we both do this, right? We've talked about this before. So it's getting people to think about, how do I start a task with AI as opposed to kind of waiting until I've gone down the road in doing this. So a planning task, a group task, right? I'm working together with a group and I'm trying to create a whole plan for rolling out a new product offering, a new service. And you're doing that not in a vacuum, you're doing that with a group of people. You should be using these tools to do that. So the timeline is that, like anything else, it starts with a few people that are evangelists and they get really good at it. And then they tell two friends and they tell two friends and so on and so on. It's kind of that old shampoo commercial, right? So I think you see this as kind of a snowball effect where you get a little bit of adoption and then you get evangelists and you get people that are telling their colleagues, why didn't you use the generative AI tool, right, to do that? And they're like, oh yeah, sure, I should have done that, right? And then we start to gamify it a little bit. We start to put in a few more kind of things that make it interesting, and you get senior executives that sometimes they're ones resisting. They're not using it in their day-to-day activity. So the CEO comes on and says, look at this thing I created. I did it for the board, and it took me, a third of the time that it would have because I started with the AI. And so it depends on how much support you have at the senior level. If you have a lot of support, it moves fairly quickly. If you don't, and you don't have enablement, it moves very slowly.
Yep. Fair. Good counsel. All right, let's tackle one of the other things that I know at least some of the people have to be asking themselves. I mean, if you read some of the economics associated with this, right? And super majority of my attention has been focused on actually the LLM training. 4, 5, $8 million, massive capital outlay in order to do that. Is there any just, truth to that? And, is that the majority of the business you see? I mean, are these multi-million-dollar projects that go on with huge capital expenditures, or how's that working?
Yeah, so I think we need to think about applying versus building the core capability. So to train a model right now is $100 million, and actually GPT-5, they're talking about it could be $1 billion. I think X.AI, Elon Musk company, has their server farm is 100,000 H100 GPUs. Each of those is $30,000 a pop, right? Just to kind of do that math, right? That's $3 billion of silicon that they just deployed into data centers. So those numbers are massive, the runs, the power, everything else. That's for the big guys, right? For everybody else, it's how do I use these things? I can do fine tuning of a model, not that expensively if I need to fine tune it, but I can use the models out of the gate without a lot of effort. I can deploy, we have some solutions that we've deployed like $30,000, $40,000. We got to deploy a solution and it works just great, right? And there's usually a managed service fee that goes with that. We have others that, could be a few $100,000. And there are some that are, if you really want to move the needle and if you want to take a lot of cost out of the business, you're going to have to spend more, right? So I might have to invest in creating a fully agentic system and build that. And that might be a couple $1 million of work or more, depending on the size of the process and the size of the data and how much integration and how much security and so on and yada, 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 right? But we're small and lean. So we, if you ask that same question for some of the bigger firms out there, those numbers would probably be quite a bit larger, several times higher than what I just quoted. So there are people who don't get out of bed for less than $15-20 million. So we're very happy to do $1 million, $2 million project or a few $100,000 project and be successful with that. So we can move really quickly because one of the things that we'll do is we'll start with a proof of value. We can demonstrate that we can solve a particular problem, like I can draft this document from the data based on these series of prompts and this prompt flow, and we can get it to 80 to 90% of the correctness of what the original document that you did manually was, but we can do it in a matter of 5 minutes, and then you can correct the errors, and the quality and consistency of that document is way higher than anything that you're developing today because it's being done by 30 different people with varying levels of writing ability, right? So we can prove that, and for $20,000-$30,000, we can prove that, right? Just to kind of put it in context, it depends on what we're doing. And then we say, now how sophisticated an implementation is it to get it to production? So we're not talking about like huge dollars to get real value, right? We can deploy for everybody an enterprise GPT solution, that we have, like give everybody the equivalent of a chat GPT capability for, hundreds of thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars in most cases.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, we should hit some of these Q&As. It's 12:45 here, so.
Yep, let's get to it. So, question number one, I'll repeat it. So Microsoft has Copilot, Salesforce has their own Copilot, Amazon has cloud, etc. Our company has M365, Salesforce, AWS, but can't blow out the budget on 3 separate siloed AI tools. What do you recommend for a situation going into 2025 budgeting?
So I think this is a good one because one is that you're already paying for Microsoft 365, and then they have Copilot on top of that for another $360 per year per user, right? It's not a trivial upcharge to put this deployed. Same thing with Salesforce with their Einstein GPT. Same thing with if you were going to use Claude Enterprise or whatever it's called. They just released now from Anthropic, which Amazon does hook up with those guys, so that's correct. For general purpose for everybody, you only need really one of those, right? Or something custom that we can deploy for you, probably for a fraction of what those things cost. Because general enterprise, general generative AI for all users is something that you shouldn't have to spend an arm and a leg to have, right? That ought to be relatively cost effective. Then you have to look at what's the utility of those things in the context of the applications that they're supporting. Claude is a standalone thing, as is ChatGPT, as is Enterprise GPT, but Microsoft 365 Copilot is tightly integrated into Office, and it's getting better and better and better, right? It's got gaps, but it's getting better. Salesforce, same thing. It's not a general purpose chatbot that you give to everybody. You don't give Salesforce licenses to your entire company because it's very expensive. You give Salesforce licenses to your sales team, some of your marketing team, and some other executives and leaders to do reports against, right? So I wouldn't do Salesforce if you're thinking, I need something basic for everybody. I might do Microsoft 365 Copilot, but there's some gaps. I might do something other like an Anthropic, or let's just say Enterprise GPT, which we can do together with Blue Mantis. Those are things that say, okay, I want to do that, and maybe what I should do from a budget perspective, because we're actually working on a tool to give out to help you with budgeting. Is there's generically, I need to enable my whole company. So that's one bucket of money. The other is, what are the high value ROI use cases that I'm going to generate custom solutions on? I need a bucket of money for that. And those could be more expensive than rolling it out to everybody. Individually, certainly collectively, you could spend a lot more money than that. So I would think of this, certainly like including enablement. $20 to $30 a user is what you should think about doing. None of those tools that are there come with enablement by themselves. You can, and there's generic enablement out there, which we talked about previously, doesn't really work. But if you want something that has enablement, that gets your users up and running, gets some people going, think about that as $20 a month with some minimums. Like you're not going to do that for a 30-person company. And you can have a lot of capability tied to your data, understands the context of your business, and so on. And that's kind of what we're delivering with our solution here as well. So you want to pick one, but you want to pick one that will work for everybody, that you're willing to deploy to every part of your business where there is knowledge work. Obviously, if you have people standing on a manufacturing line, they're not necessarily going to be using a chatbot during the day, right? But I do think it's important to say that's bucket one. Bucket two is how much budget do I want to put into these different solution areas? Find the parts of your business where there's knowledge work that has the most amount of labor, right? Whether it's in your operations function, customer service function, sales function, marketing, et cetera. Look where those big buckets are, right? And try to figure out, if I build a solution that can do generative AI that can take a third of that cost out over the course of the next year or so, what's that worth to me, right? That budget decision could be very easy. I should be thinking about, if I spend what that cost takeout is in the first year, in the second year, I make it back, in the third year, I make it a profit, right? That's a pretty easy conversation.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I would make sure that I have at least some process application, kind of functional specific, and then a generic capability for everybody.
Yeah. And just to put a finer point on it, I would imagine that as budgets are reviewed, I think it's a great question to just say, is Gen AI an option here in terms of if we're going up or down on the line item spend? I think that's an easy.
I think if you're not putting generative AI into your 2025 budget in some form, at least getting everybody, getting into everybody's hands, giving them some generic capabilities so that they can move faster and do what I did this morning, right? Having that kind of power at their hands. I think if you don't do that, honestly, I think that's, at this point, starting to become like that could be a limiter for your business.
Yep. Great. All right. Next question here. So what are some usage scenarios for AI as a force multiplier in companies less than 500 people? So specifically kind of categorizing that outside of marketing. For example, our company plays in manufacturing and wants to enhance operational efficiency for existing customers. Any suggestions there?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer that without understanding the context of your business. And I'm happy to have that conversation. We can have that conversation offline at some point if you want to talk about it. But I think you have to look at what is the data that you have access to that could that could be applicable to generative AI. And I think a real quick grounding here. There's AI, right? And then there's a subset called generative AI, which is what we've been talking about. And then there's machine learning, where I can apply, with predictive analytics, and I'm trying to figure out kind of how to optimize my costs and all sorts of other kind of very, very analytical, math-oriented stuff, right? That's a different thing. Now, if I want to think about how do I make it easier for my customers, maybe I have a lot of SKUs, maybe I'm manufacturing things that have a lot of complexity to them. And I might have multiple generations of those things deployed in the field with lots of different products. A great use case would be to put all of your documentation behind a service that the service technicians and the client can get access to, so that they can ask questions, right? And that would save them a lot of time and also make the quality of service a lot higher. But there's a lot more to this. I mean, I think I'd have to kind of look at your process. We've done this for other clients, but it's not very easy to answer that generically. You can get a lot of value, even in a smaller company, by thinking about where's the cost or where's the value prop, right? Am I going to sell more? Am I going to have higher net revenue retention, client satisfaction by doing this? And that's going to translate into business results for me. We can help you think through that process, if that helps.
Yep. All right. Very good. So last one here. What role does or can your MS team structure of teams and data play on implementing Copilot? Are there any best practices that we should think of?
Yeah, so and in this case, what we're specifically talking about is Microsoft's Copilot for Microsoft 365. In this case, I think that's what that question's coming from, you, Charles. But you can confirm it. If I'm wrong, just let me know in the Q&A there. But the short answer is that everything, right? So Microsoft Copilot for Microsoft 365 talks to the Microsoft Graph API. For those of you who don't know what that is that's the API that knows everything about everything that you do with Microsoft. It knows about your emails, it knows about your folders, it knows about the documents, it knows about your Teams chats, it knows about everything within Microsoft 365 that you do is accessible, I mean, virtually everything via the API. That's a good thing. It's also potentially a scary thing. So the best practice is you need to understand what the state of your data is in terms of making this available. I know this is going to sound really scary to some of you, but I've gone into clients where I've said, where they've turned on a couple of licenses, and I've said, ask a question that it shouldn't know an answer to, because you don't want employees knowing that. Like, give me the MSAs that I have with this bank, right? Or give me this contract that I have with this executive. And funny thing is that sometimes it finds those because the Microsoft Graph knows where it is, right? And the generative AI can search that. It's all indexed. So I think one of the things to be careful about is best practices is that you need to understand what the impact is on your data estate before you're go all in with a Copilot for 365 kind of implementation. There's not a lot that you can customize in the generic, in the base level, right? You get it out there, you can customize it with add-ons that you could build with Copilot Studio and other things. But really what you want to make sure is that you've got your data house in order first. So that's first best practice. Second, obviously, is the training and education and learning about where to do this and how to do it. Just yesterday, there was an update release, version 2 of Copilot that was announced. We'll post a link to a video on that if anybody wants to see that. And but your team's structure and data, right? You've got Teams sites, you've got Teams folders, you've got permissions on them. A lot of times those things are not as locked down as they should be. People can find teams that they might not want to be accessed. So you want to lock things down a little bit. That's best practices. The structure of how you've set that up, I'm going to say the structure doesn't matter. It's really about access to data. Access to data is the most important thing.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. And shameless plug, right? I mean, we do have ways to help them manage around that data state and all the appropriate authorized access to data. So
absolutely. I mean, and I think that's an important, if you're thinking about Microsoft Copilot for 365, I would highly recommend that you at least do an assessment of where you are on your data and for your Microsoft 365 environment. So SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, all of that. You need to have a good handle on what your risks are there, because it can be risky.
Totally. Well said. All right. Well, we are approaching the top of the hour here. John, any parting thoughts for the audience?
Yeah, I think this has been, first of all, Jeff, thanks. This has been a great conversation and some good questions. And, I always say this, I know it's going to sound self-serving because we're in this business, but we're in this business because we believe in the opportunity here. We're in this business because we saw what we could do with it ourselves, and we're using it. I highly recommend to everybody that if you haven't done so already, that you have kind of a board level initiative, right? Executive level initiative. And if you're having trouble figuring out how to get the business case through, how to get that communication, how to figure out where the real value is, that's what we do. That's how we help our clients through that process, working with the executive teams. I spend more time, honestly, at my clients, I spend more time with business leaders than I do with the IT leaders after we get in and going here, because that's where the core value is being created. So if you need some help with that, let us know. But in the meantime, whatever you do, just do something, right? Move it forward and put some money behind it, and do some testing and experimentation. And you may be amazed. I mean, again, the models are moving forward so fast that whatever you can do today, right, is going to look like kind of child's play 6 months, a year from now.
Yep. Well said. So, John, thank you for your time. It's a pleasure as always. You are a visionary in this space, and I look forward to more conversations just like this.
Well, thanks, Jeff. It's really a pleasure to be partnered with you guys, and we're excited to continue that. So thanks for having us.
Yes, sir. And to our audience, if you would like to have a conversation with Mr. Treadway, myself, reach out to your contact at Blue Mantis, and we're happy to have a discussion with you. So thank you very much for attending, and I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks.